The static on Cinderfall tasted like copper and old batteries. It was a sensation that never truly left the back of the throat, a constant reminder that the atmosphere of this moon was less air and more a suspension of electrically charged dust waiting to arc. Anthony Hale sat hunched over a workbench that had seen better centuries, his fingers manipulating the guts of a hydration recycler, with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of fixing things that were not meant to be fixed. He was a man who looked like he had been assembled from spare parts himself, a spine slightly curved from too much time, reading schematics, hair the color of oxidized iron, and eyes that were perpetually narrowed behind thick, protective spectacles. He wore a canvas jumpsuit that had been patched so many times the original fabric was a mystery. To the residents of Wisp Harbor, he was just Anthony the guy who could convince a fusion battery to hold a charge for one more week. He preferred it that way. "Papa!" a voice chirped from the pile of scavenged junk behind him. Anthony did not look up. He was busy trying to bypass a logic gate that had fried 3 days ago. "If you are about to ask if we can keep the stray drone you found in the vents, the answer is still no. It leaks hydraulic fluid, Poppy." "It's not about the drone. That drone is boring now," Poppy said. She was sitting atop a stack of crate lids, her legs swinging. She was 12, with eyes too sharp for her age, and grease stains on her cheeks that she wore like war paint. In her hands, she held Anthony's personal data pad, a brick of a device that he kept only for emergency weather alerts. Anthony frowned, finally looking up. "Why do you have my comms unit?" "I was bored," Poppy said, her grin widening, revealing a missing canine tooth. "And I thought you were lonely, so I fixed it." "Fixed what it wasn't broken." "Your social life," she declared. "I sent a message to the neighbor." Anthony felt a cold spike of adrenaline that had nothing to do with the atmospheric static. Which neighbor? The tall one, with the ears. The one who looks like she could bite through a steel pipe but smells like ozone and tea. Sarah, the Vulpine exile living in the refugee tents 3 sectors down. The woman who moved with the silent predatory grace of an apex hunter and had a gaze that made Anthony feel like he was made of glass. He had spoken to her exactly twice, once to tell her that her generator was going to explode if she didn't unblock the vent, and once to accept a silent nod of thanks after he fixed it. "Poppy," Anthony said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What did you send?" Poppy tapped the screen and turned it around. The green text glowed innocently against the cracked glass. "Date me tonight." The silence in the workshop was absolute, save for the hum of the recycler. "You." Anthony choked out, standing up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the metal floor. "You sent that to Sarah Vera." "It is a joke," Poppy defended herself, though she looked slightly less confident now. "You know, because she is scary, and you are you. I thought she would block us." The datapad chimed, a harsh, singular ping that echoed in the small room. Poppy looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. "Uh-oh." Anthony snatched the device from her hands. The reply was 3 words. "My tent. Now." Anthony stared at the screen. He felt the blood drain from his face. This was not a flirtatious invitation. This was a summons. Or perhaps a death sentence. Vulpines were known for their territorial instincts, and Sarah Vera was a woman who seemingly had 0 patience for nonsense. "Stay here," Anthony ordered, grabbing his tool belt purely out of nervous habit. "Do not touch anything. Do not message anyone. Do not even breathe loudly. Good luck." "Good." Poppy called out entirely too cheerful as Anthony bolted out the door. The air outside was thick and heavy. The sky above Wisp Harbor was a bruised purple, the clouds churning with a dark magnetic interference that signaled the approach of the bloom. It was the season when the planet's magnetosphere buckled, allowing cosmic radiation to twist the atmosphere into a kaleidoscope of black auroras and singing metal. Anthony navigated the labyrinth of the drift, the refugee sector, with frantic speed. The drift was a chaotic sprawl of pressurized tents, cargo containers, and salvaged hull plates welded together. It smelled of recycled air spices from a dozen different worlds and the underlying stench of ozone. He reached Sarah's dwelling. It was a large, military-grade survival tent reinforced with scrap metal plating to withstand the sandstorms. He stood before the flap, smoothing his jumpsuit, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He needed to explain. He needed to tell her that his daughter was a chaotic genius with zero social boundaries, and that he, Anthony Hale, had absolutely no intention of making inappropriate advances toward a woman who could likely dismantle him with one hand. He cleared his throat and tapped on the metal frame. "Ms. Vera, it is Anthony. About the message." "Get in," her voice came from inside. It was low, rough, and carried a vibration that he felt in his chest. Anthony stepped inside, ready to bow in apology. "Listen, Poppy got hold of my—" He stopped. The interior of the tent was not what he expected. He had anticipated a living space. Instead, it looked like a tactical command post. Maps of the Cinderfall cavern systems were pinned to the magnetic ribs of the tent. A high-frequency radio receiver older than Poppy was on a crate, hissing with static. And Sarah was not standing there waiting to berate him. She was crouched over a cot in the corner, her back to him. Her long, russet tail was rigid, the fur standing on end. Her triangular ears were flattened against her skull. She turned as he entered. Sarah Vera was striking in a terrifying way, sharp features, eyes, the color of amber that seemed to catch light where there was none, and movement so fluid it made human motion look jerky. But right now her face was tight with fear. "Close the flap," she snapped. "Did anyone see you—" "I what?" Anthony blinked, his prepared speech evaporating. "No, I ran straight here. Look, about the text." "The code was sloppy," Sarah interrupted, turning back to the cot. "Date me is usually danger, and tonight means immediate extraction needed. But coming from your ID, I assumed you intercepted a frequency." Anthony stood frozen near the entrance, his brain doing a rapid recalibration. "Wait. You thought I was sending a distress code?" Sarah paused, looking over her shoulder. Her expression shifted from urgency to confusion, and then slowly to a look of deadpan realization. "You mean you were actually asking me out?" "No," Anthony shouted, then lowered his voice frantically. "No, God, no, it was Poppy. She was prank messaging. I came to apologize before you came over there and gutted me." Sarah stared at him for 3 long seconds. Then a short, sharp bark of laughter escaped her throat. It was a dry sound devoid of humor. "A prank. Right. Of course. The old nerd asking the refugee for a date. I should have known." "I am not that old," Anthony muttered, though the relief that she was not going to kill him was immense. "I am sorry for the confusion. I will leave you to—" "Stay," Sarah commanded. The authority in her voice was absolute. She stepped aside, revealing who was on the cot. It was her son, Rowan. The boy was maybe 7 years old, a hybrid with softer features than his mother, but the same fox-like ears. He was shivering violently despite the heavy thermal blankets piled on top of him. But it was not a fever shiver. Under the boy's pale skin, veins were glowing with a faint, iridescent light. It looked as if crushed diamonds were flowing through his bloodstream, pulsing in a rhythm that was slightly faster than a heartbeat. "What is this?" Anthony asked, stepping forward instinctively. His curiosity overrode his social anxiety instantly. "Dr. Keene calls it bloom shock," Sarah said, her voice tight. "But the meds are not working. He started convulsing 10 minutes ago. That is why I replied now. I thought maybe you knew something. You fix things." "I fix toasters, not biology," Anthony said, but he was already kneeling by the cot. He pulled a small multi-tool from his belt, switching it to a passive scanning mode. He waved it over the boy's chest. The scanner screeched. Harmonic resonance, Anthony whispered, his eyes locked on the readout. His nervous system is acting like an antenna. He is not sick, Sarah. He is phasing. Phasing? Sarah knelt beside him, her scent ozone and dried sage filling Anthony's nose. Speak plainly. Anthony adjusted his spectacles, his mind racing through equations he hadn't used in a decade. The bloom creates a dimensional shear. Usually, organic matter is too dense to resonate with it. But Rowan, his bioelectric field is syncing with the atmospheric static. Look at the frequency. He pointed to the trembling numbers on his tool. 200 hertz. If it hits 400, his neural pathways will overload. He will burn out from the inside. He stood up, looking around the tent. We need a Faraday cage. No, that is too simple. We need a localized dampening field to disrupt the connection between him and the bloom. He grabbed the old radio receiver from the crate. I can modify this. Reverse the polarity on the input coil, turn it into a jammer. Hand me that bonding tape. Sarah handed him the tape without a word. She watched him work. Her eyes tracked his hands that were usually shaking slightly but were now rock steady as he tore into the radio's casing. You are bypassing the regulator, she noted softly. The regulator limits the output to safe listening levels, Anthony muttered, stripping a wire with his teeth. We do not want safe. We want noise. White noise in the subspectrum. He twisted two wires together, sparks showering onto the dusty floor. Done. Turn it on. Sarah flipped the switch. The radio didn't produce sound. Instead, the air in the tent seemed to thicken, a pressure building in the ears. On the cot, Rowan gasped. The glowing light in his veins flickered and dimmed. His shivering slowed, then stopped. He took a deep, ragged breath and fell into a natural sleep. Anthony slumped back against a crate, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for 20 minutes. He looked up to find Sarah staring at him. Her gaze was measuring, calculating. You fix toasters, she repeated, her voice flat. And radios. Anthony deflected, wiping grease on his thigh. It is just basic physics. That was not basic physics, Sarah said. She stepped closer, towering over him even as he sat. That was quantum harmonic theory. You diagnosed a dimensional resonance error in 30 seconds, using a screwdriver and a piece of junk. I read a lot, Anthony said weakly. You are a liar, Anthony Hale, Sarah said. But there was no malice in it. Just a cold, hard curiosity. But you saved my son. So for now, I do not care. Before Anthony could invent a better lie, the tent flap swept open. Dr. Keene strode in. She was a woman in her 60s, with skin like tanned leather and hair chopped short with a knife. She carried a medical bag that looked like it had survived a war, which it probably had. I heard the transmission spike, Dr. Keene grumbled, glaring at the modified radio. I assume that was you, Hale, trying to fry everyone's comms. Trying to keep the boy from short-circuiting. Anthony stood up, brushing dust off his knees. Keene checked Rowan's vitals, her grumpy expression softening slightly. Pulse is stable. Luminosity is down. Good work. I would have just sedated him, but your way is less damaging to the liver. Doctor, Sarah said, ignoring the praise. Is he safe? For now, Keene sighed, straightening up. But the bloom hasn't even hit its peak. The atmospheric pressure is going to double by midnight. This, she gestured to the radio, is a Band-Aid. We need shielding. Real shielding. Or better yet, we need to get him off this rock. We can't leave, Sarah said, her ears dipping. The shuttles are grounded until the storm passes. Speaking of shuttles, Keene said, looking at Anthony, you might want to head to the hub. Halston is calling a town meeting. Something about a missing shipment. Anthony felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I should go back to Poppy. Go to the hub, Sarah said suddenly. I need to stay with Rowan. Find out what is happening. If the shuttles are grounded, nothing should be flying." "I am not a messenger," Anthony protested. "No," Sarah looked him in the eye. "You are the guy who understands resonance. If something is out there causing trouble in the bloom, you will understand it better than Halston's goons. Go, please." The please was awkward foreign on her tongue. It was that single word that made Anthony nod. The hub was the only permanent structure in Wisp Harbor, a prefabricated concrete dome left over from the original mining colony. It served as the town hall, the bar, and the emergency shelter. When Anthony slipped in through the back maintenance door, the air was thick with smoke and shouting. Warden Halston stood on a crate in the center of the room. Halston was a bear of a man, his uniform straining at the shoulders, his face weary. "I am telling you, we lost contact at 1400 hours," Halston shouted over the crowd of miners and scavengers. "Supply pod 7 Alpha. It was carrying medical isotopes and filtration units. It went down near Glass Ravine." "Glass Ravine is suicide during bloom," a miner shouted. "The crystal formations amplify the static. It cooks your brain." "We need those filters," Halston roared back. "The atmospheric scrubbers are failing in Sector 4. Anthony stayed in the shadows, leaning against a vending machine that hummed erratically. He watched the desperate faces of his neighbors. They were scared. The bloom was always dangerous, but this year it felt different. Heavier, hungrier. "Excuse me," a smooth, cultured voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. The room went silent. From the VIP entrance, a door rarely used, a man stepped forward. He wore a suit. Not a flight suit, not a vac suit, but a tailored charcoal gray business suit that looked obscenely clean against the grime of Wisp Harbor. 2 drones hovered silently over his shoulders, their sensor eyes glowing red. Director Malcor Rene. Anthony stopped breathing. He shrank back into the shadow of the vending machine, his heart slamming against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack them. Malcor Rene smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Citizens of Wisp Harbor, I understand your distress." "Who let the Combine in?" someone muttered, but no one spoke up. The Asterian Combine owned the mining rights to half the moon. Technically, they owned the ground everyone was standing on. "I have a proposition," Malcor said, clasping his hands behind his back. "That pod contains property of the Asterian Combine, essential survey data. While I sympathize with your need for filters, my priority is the data recovery." He scanned the room. His eyes were pale blue cold and calculating, moving from face to face like he was inventorying livestock. "Any team that retrieves the pod will be compensated. 5,000 credits per head, and I will donate a new atmospheric scrubber to the settlement." A murmur went through the crowd. 5,000 credits was a year's wages. "However," Malcor continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming silky and dangerous, "if the data is tampered with, or if anyone attempts to retain it, the Combine will consider it an act of corporate theft, and we protect our assets aggressively." Anthony pressed himself flat against the wall. "He is here. After 6 years, he is here." He felt a tug on his sleeve. He nearly jumped out of his skin. It was Poppy. She had followed him. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Why are you shaking?" "We are leaving," Anthony whispered back, grabbing her hand. "Now." "But that is the bad man, isn't it?" Poppy didn't move. She was looking at Malcor with a terrifying intensity. "The one from your old pictures. The ones you burned." "Poppy, quiet," Anthony hissed. "He wants the pod." "Poppy," said her mind, working faster than Anthony liked. "If he wants it, it must be important. More important than filters." "It does not matter. We are going home." Anthony dragged her toward the exit, but the crowd blocked them. People were arguing, forming teams, shouting about the credits. "I will go," a voice rang out from the entrance. Anthony froze. He knew that voice. Sarah stood in the doorway. She had left the tent. She looked exhausted, her uniform rumpled, but her posture was erect. "I know the ravine," Sarah said, stepping into the light. "I can track the magnetic distortion trails. I can find the pod before the sand buries it." Malcor Rane turned to her. He looked at her ears. Her tail and his lip curled slightly. "A vulpine tracker, how quaint. Do you have a team?" Sarah hesitated. She was a refugee. She had no team. The miners looked at her with distrust. "I do not need a team," she said. "The ravine will kill you alone, darling," Malcor said dismissively. "Next volunteer." Sarah's fists clenched. She needed those credits. Anthony knew it. She needed them to buy passage off-world for Rowan. Anthony looked at Malcor, the man who had signed the order that turned his previous life into ash. He looked at Sarah, who was standing alone against a room full of bigotry and indifference. He looked at Poppy, who was watching him, waiting to see what kind of man her father actually was. "Don't do it," his survival instinct screamed. "Stay hidden, stay a ghost." Anthony let go of Poppy's hand. He stepped out of the shadows. "She is not alone," Anthony said. The room turned to look at him. Malcor's eyes slid over him, indifferent. He didn't recognize Anthony. Why would he? Anthony Hale was dead. This was just a graying, hunched junk repairman. "And who are you?" Malcor asked, bored. "I am the mechanic," Anthony said, his voice surprisingly steady. "If that pod is down in the ravine, the guidance chips are fried. You need someone to bypass the security lockout without triggering the self-destruct. Unless you want your data incinerated." Malcor paused. He tapped his chin. "Valid point. Very well. The Fox and the mechanic, bring me my property. You have 12 hours before the bloom peaks." Outside the hub, the wind had picked up, howling through the metal skeletons of the mining rigs. Sarah cornered him behind a stack of crates. "What are you doing? You were terrified in there." "I am still terrified," Anthony said, his hands shaking as he lit a heating coil to warm his fingers. "But you cannot navigate the ravine alone. The magnetic fields will scramble your inner ear. You will walk in circles until you die." "I can smell the quantum shear," Sarah argued, though she looked relieved. "I would have found a way." "You would have died," Anthony corrected. "Anthony. And Rowan needs you alive." Sarah looked away, her ears twitching. "Why did you step up? You hate attention. And Poppy said you knew that man." "Poppy talks too much," Anthony muttered. "I stepped up because the ravine is tricky." "Liar," Sarah said again. But she stepped closer, her voice softening. "You are doing this for the credits." "I am doing it because I am an idiot," Anthony sighed. "Meet me at the north gate in 20 minutes. I have a crawler. It is ugly, but it is shielded." "Anthony," Sarah said. He stopped. "Thank you." He waved a hand dismissively. "Don't call me a hero. I hate heroes. They usually end up dead." Sarah smirked, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. "I wouldn't dream of it. I was going to call you old nerd." "I am 38, Anthony grumbled as he walked away. "That is prime age." 20 minutes later, the crawler sat idling at the gate. It was a monstrosity of welded plates and oversized tires, looking more like a mobile bunker than a vehicle. Poppy was in the back seat, strapped in before Anthony could argue. "I am the navigator," she declared, holding the data pad. "And I packed sandwiches." "If we die," Anthony told her, as he adjusted the overhead controls, "I am grounding you for eternity." Sarah climbed into the passenger seat. She had strapped a kinetic pistol to her thigh and wore a rebreather mask around her neck. She looked over at Anthony. "Ready, old nerd." Anthony looked through the reinforced windshield. The sky was now fully black, but not dark. Ribbons of negative light, the bloom, were tearing through the clouds, silent and terrifying. The metal dashboard of the crawler was vibrating, a low hum that resonated in his teeth. He looked at his hands on the controls. They were scarred, stained with grease and trembling. But as he gripped the wheel, the trembling stopped. He wasn't just a mechanic tonight. He was a man with a target. Malcor Rane wanted what was in that pod, which meant Anthony needed to get to it first. Not for the money. Not even for Sarah. He was going to find out what the Combine was hiding, and then he was going to burn them down with it. "Let's go," Anthony said. He punched the throttle. The crawler roared, spitting gravel, and drove straight into the storm. The crawler, a vehicle Anthony had affectionately named the Rusty Tortoise, groaned as it crested the ridge of the crater. It was an ugly machine, a patchwork of welded steel plates, oversized tires scavenged from a mining hauler, and a cabin that smelled permanently of grease and stale coffee. But it was shielded. Anthony had spent 3 years lining the chassis with lead and copper mesh, creating a rolling Faraday cage that could withstand the electromagnetic tantrums of Cinderfall. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension and the smell of the tuna sandwich Poppy was eating in the back seat. "Are we there yet?" Poppy asked, her mouth half full. She was strapped into a jump seat surrounded by crates of spare parts, looking less like a child and more like a stowaway in a cargo hold. "We will be there when the screaming stops," Anthony muttered, his knuckles white on the steering yoke. "The screaming." Poppy paused, holding her sandwich midair. "The wind," Anthony corrected, though he wasn't entirely sure. "The wind passing through the glass ravine. It creates a harmonic whistle, like a flute made of nightmares." Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her posture rigid. She had not relaxed since they left the perimeter of Wisp Harbor. Her eyes were closed, her ears swiveling independently, tracking sounds that Anthony couldn't hear even with the crawler's sensory array. Every few minutes, her nose would twitch, inhaling the recycled air, as if trying to filter out the scent of the future. 2 degrees west, Sarah said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. They were amber slits in the gloom of the cabin. "The static is heavier there. It tastes like burnt sugar and ozone." Anthony adjusted the yoke. "That is the Bloom interference. Are you sure that is the trail?" "I am sure," Sarah said. Her voice was tight. "The pod left a scar in the magnetic field when it came down. It is bleeding energy. Just drive, old nerd." Anthony gritted his teeth. "I told you I am 38. They descended into the shadow of the ravine. The headlights of the crawler cut through the swirling dust, illuminating the landscape. Glass Ravine earned its name honestly. It was a geological wound in the moon's crust, where intense volcanic heat and high silica sand had fused to create towering cliffs of obsidian and semi-translucent crystal. As the crawler rolled over the glassy ground, the sound began. It started as a low hum vibrating through the tires and into the chassis. Then, as the wind picked up, the cliffs began to sing a high, mournful resonance that sounded like 1,000 wet fingers circling the rims of 1,000 crystal glasses. "Turn off the engine," Sarah commanded. Anthony killed the drive. The crawler coasted to a halt. The silence of the engine was immediately replaced by the singing of the ravine. "Why are we stopping?" Poppy whispered, sensing the shift in mood. "Because we are close." Sarah unbuckled her harness. She moved with a fluidity that made Anthony feel clumsy and heavy. She reached for the door handle. "And because something else is out there, I can smell the heat." Anthony grabbed his tool belt and a modified plasma cutter that he used for welding or for scaring away scavengers. "Poppy, stay in the car. Lock the doors. Do not open them unless I knock 3 times in the pattern." "Shave and a haircut," Poppy suggested. "No, the pattern is 3 prime numbers. 2 knocks, 3 knocks, 5 knocks." Poppy rolled her eyes. "You are such a geek. Fine, be careful." Anthony and Sarah stepped out into the ravine. The wind whipped at Anthony's jumpsuit, carrying grains of glass dust that stung his face. He pulled his goggles down tight. The crash site was 200 meters ahead, nestled at the base of a jagged obsidian spire. The supply pod was a blackened ruin. It hadn't just crashed. It looked like it had been ripped open. The heavy titanium alloy plating was peeled back like the skin of an orange. Cargo containers lay scattered across the glass floor, medical supplies, ration packs and water filtration units, all smashed and leaking. But there were no bodies. "This does not make sense," Anthony murmured, scanning the wreckage with his handheld sensor. "The impact vector suggests a controlled slide. The crew should have survived. Where are they?" Sarah was crouching near a patch of disturbed sand. She ran a gloved hand over a deep groove in the ground. "Dragged," she said. 3 people, maybe 4. They were pulled away from the wreck. By whom? Scavengers?" "No." Sarah stood up, her tail lashing behind her. "Scavengers leave boot prints. These marks are smooth, like a snake the width of a barrel." She turned her head, sniffing the air deeply, her face twisted in disgust. "And the smell. It is not biological. It smells cold, like metal that thinks it is alive." Anthony felt a shiver trace its way down his spine. He walked toward the center of the wreckage, his sensor pinging softly. "I am picking up a signal. Low frequency. Encrypted." He knelt beside a crushed avionics panel. Hidden beneath a tangle of wires was a small black box. It was seamless humming, with a rhythm that matched the throbbing headache beginning to form behind Anthony's eyes. He reached out and brushed the dust off it. The object pulsed with a faint violet light. "The Veil Seed," Anthony whispered. "Malcor was not lying about the data. This is a key." "A key to what?" Sarah asked, stepping closer, her hand resting on the hilt of her kinetic pistol. "To a lock that should stay closed," Anthony said grimly. He reached to pick it up. Throom. The ground beneath them bucked. It wasn't a tremor. It was a physical blow from below. Anthony was thrown backward, sliding across the slick glass surface. He scrambled to his feet, aiming his plasma cutter at the ground. "Seismic activity." "No!" Sarah yelled, backing away. Heartbeat. 10 meters away, the glass floor shattered. A nightmare erupted from the earth. It was massive, easily the size of the crawler. It looked like a cross between a mole and a heavily armored tank. Its body was covered in thick chitinous plates that shimmered with metallic oil. It had no eyes, just a smooth, terrifyingly blank expanse of armor, where a face should be. But its mouth was a nightmare of rotating, grinding gears designed to chew through rock and metal. "Subterranean resonance burrower." Anthony shouted, his voice cracking. "Do not move." Sarah froze. "What?" "It is blind," Anthony yelled over the roar of the wind. "It hunts by vibration. It feels footsteps on the glass." The creature let out a shriek that wasn't a sound, but a blast of compressed air and static. It swiveled its massive head, the mandibles clicking together with the sound of snapping steel. It slammed its clawed forelegs onto the glass, sending a spiderweb of cracks racing toward them. "Run!" Sarah asked, her voice deadly calm. "If you run, you create a rhythmic vibration," Anthony hissed. "It will snap you in half before you make 10 meters." The creature lunged at the wreckage of the pod, tearing a chunk of titanium with terrifying ease. It was searching, hunting. "We need a distraction," Anthony said, his mind racing through schematics and physics variables. "Something loud, something rhythmic. Hey, ugly!" The voice was small, high-pitched, and came from the wrong direction. Anthony spun around. Poppy was standing on the roof of the crawler, 200 meters away. She was holding something above her head. "Poppy, get back inside!" Anthony screamed, forgetting his own rule about noise. The creature's head snapped toward the crawler. It hissed, its body coiling like a spring. "Catch, Papa!" Poppy yelled, and she hurled the object with all her might. It arced through the air, landing on the glass slope about 50 meters from Anthony. It was a toy, a bright, pink plastic flower in a pot. As it hit the ground, the impact switch activated. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. The tinny synthesized music echoed off the canyon walls. The creature paused. It tilted its head. The rhythmic, repetitive electronic melody was alien to it, confusing its sensors. She brought the singing sunflower. Anthony stared in disbelief. I told her to throw that away 3 years ago. It is working, Sarah whispered. The beast is confused. Not for long, Anthony said, watching the creature inch toward the toy. Once it realizes it is not meat, it will turn back to the biggest heat source, which is the crawler, and Poppy. Anthony looked at the veil seed in his hand, then at the plasma cutter, then at the singing sunflower. His brain, usually cluttered with anxiety and regret, suddenly cleared. It was a clarity he hadn't felt since his days in the labs, the cold, sharp focus of engineering a solution. I need to boost the signal, Anthony muttered. Overload its sensory array. He sprinted. Anthony, Sarah shouted, but she didn't chase him. She understood. She raised her pistol and fired 2 shots at the creature's armored flank. The bullets sparked and ricocheted, useless as pebbles, but they made the creature roar and turn toward her. Keep it looking at you, Anthony yelled. He slid next to the singing toy. His hands moved in a blur. He slammed the butt of his plasma cutter into the plastic casing of the flower, cracking it open. He ripped out the speaker wire and the battery pack. Then, he jammed the leads of the plasma cutter directly into the toy's audio circuit board. Come on, he muttered, adjusting the output dial on his cutter. Do not melt, just amplify. He twisted the voltage regulator to maximum. The toy began to glow. The song distorted, dropping in pitch, becoming a bass-heavy thrum that vibrated the very teeth in Anthony's skull. You are my sunshine. It was no longer a song. It was a sonic weapon. Anthony armed the plasma cutter's overload capacitor and threw the contraption as hard as he could toward the far canyon wall, away from the crawler and away from them. The device hit the wall and stuck, melting into the obsidian. The sound coming from it was deafening, a rhythmic pounding that mimicked the footsteps of a giant. The burrower shrieked. It ignored Sarah. It ignored the crawler. It turned and charged at the canyon wall with the force of a freight train. Crash. The creature slammed into the cliff face, burying its grinding jaws into the rock, tearing at the source of the noise. Now, Anthony yelled. He grabbed Sarah's arm. Run! Irregular patterns do not run in a straight line. They scrambled up the scree slope, toward a cluster of smaller caves near the ridge. They moved in a chaotic, staggering rhythm, step, pause, slide, jump, to confuse any lingering sensors the beast might have. They dove into a narrow fissure in the rock, just as the singing sunflower finally exploded in a shower of sparks, silencing the noise. The creature roared in frustration, thrashing in the dust below, but it had lost them. Anthony slumped against the cold stone wall of the cave, gasping for air. His lungs burned. His hands were shaking again. Sarah was leaning opposite him, her chest heaving. She looked at him, her eyes wide, glowing faintly in the dark. You, she panted, wiping dust from her whiskers. You weaponized a nursery rhyme. It was simple acoustics, Anthony wheezed, trying to sound dignified while clutching a stitch in his side. Resonance amplification. Simple, Sarah repeated. She shook her head, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. You are insane, but effective. She pushed herself off the wall and walked over to him. She leaned in close, too close. He could smell the ozone scent of her fur and the metallic tang of adrenaline. She poked him in the chest with a sharp finger. If you die out here, Anthony Hale, she whispered, I am definitely not dating you. Anthony blinked, his brain short-circuiting for the second time that night. Wait. That means if I live, you are... Sarah didn't answer. She turned away, her ears swiveling toward the deeper darkness of the cave. Hush, I smell fear. Fear, human sweat, old blood and sickness. She pointed down the tunnel. The survivors, they are here. They moved deeper into the cave system. The wind outside was muffled here, replaced by the sound of dripping water and ragged breathing. Huddled in a small cavern were 4 people. They wore the uniforms of the transport crew. One was lying still, covered in a thermal blanket. The other 3 were backed against the wall, holding makeshift weapons, lengths of pipe and a wrench. "Stay back!" one of them shouted, swinging the pipe. "We saw what you did to the ship." "We are rescue," Anthony called out, holding his hands up. "Wisp Harbor. We are from the outpost." The man lowered the pipe slightly. He looked at Sarah, his eyes narrowing. "A fox is she with the Combine?" "I am with the guy who just blew up a plastic flower to save your lives," Sarah growled. "Lower the weapon before I make you eat it." "Dr. Keene sent us," Anthony added quickly, stepping between them. "We are here to take you back." The crew leader, a woman with a bandaged head, slumped in relief. "Thank you. God, we thought you were the drones." "Drones?" Anthony asked sharply. "We saw drones earlier. But they were scanning." "Scanning." The woman laughed bitterly. "They are hunting. The Combine didn't send a rescue team. They sent a cleanup crew. They fired on us when we crawled out of the wreckage. That is why we hid in the caves. They don't want witnesses." Anthony looked at Sarah. Her face had hardened into stone. "Malcor," Anthony said the name, tasting like bile. "He sent us to get the data. He did not care if we brought you back." "He probably hoped the beast or the drones would kill us all," Sarah said. "2 birds, 1 stone. He gets his data and no witnesses left to ask for paychecks." "We need to move," Anthony said. "The beast is distracted, but the drones will pick up our heat signatures eventually." "We can't walk," the woman said, gesturing to the man on the ground. "His leg is crushed. We have been dragging him." Anthony looked at the injured man, then at the narrow, twisting exit of the cave. Carrying a stretcher over the glass shards outside was impossible with the beast nearby. "We need the crawler," Anthony said. "I have to bring it to the cave mouth." "Too dangerous," Sarah said. "The beast will hear the engine." "Not if the drones are louder," Anthony said, his mind already assembling the next desperate plan. He looked at the crew. "Give me your comms units, all of them." "Why, because I am going to build a choir," Anthony said, grabbing a handful of wires from his belt. 10 minutes later, they were at the cave entrance. Anthony had rigged the 4 comms units together, stripping their shielding and tuning them to a specific oscillating frequency. He tied the bundle to a heavy chunk of reflective quartz. "Here is the plan," Anthony whispered to the group. "The drones use LiDAR and ultrasonic mapping to navigate the ravines. I am going to throw this bundle onto that ridge." He pointed to a jagged spire 50 meters to the east. "It will broadcast a feedback loop, a screech so high-pitched it will look like a solid wall to their sensors. The drones will swarm it to investigate the anomaly." "And the beast?" Sarah asked. "The beast hates high-pitched noises," Anthony said. "It will charge the drones. While they are fighting, I drive the crawler up here. We load everyone, and we run like hell." "It is a fragile plan," Sarah noted. "It is a terrible plan," Anthony corrected. "But it is the only one we have." He nodded to Sarah. She took the bundle of comms units. With her enhanced strength, she hurled it. The device sailed through the air and landed perfectly on the ridge. Anthony hit the remote activation on his datapad. A piercing electronic scream erupted from the ridge. It was outside human hearing range, but Anthony saw the effect immediately. High above, 3 dark shapes peeled off from the cloud layer. The drones. They dove toward the ridge, their red eyes glowing weapons, charging. At the same time, the ground shook. The beast, enraged by the new sound, burst from the canyon floor below and scrambled up the cliff face toward the drones. "Go!" Anthony sprinted for the crawler. He reached the vehicle, wrenched the door open, and fired the engine. Poppy was already scrambling into the back to make room. "Papa, that looks like a monster movie out there," she yelled, pointing at the cliff where the beast was currently swatting a drone out of the air. "Do not watch! Just clear the seats," Anthony floored the crawler. The tires spun on the glass, finding grip, and the heavy machine roared up the slope. He drifted it sideways in front of the cave entrance. "Load up now!" Sarah and the crew survivors dragged the injured man into the back. It was a tangle of limbs, groans and crates being shoved aside. "We are heavy!" Sarah yelled, jumping into the passenger seat. "The suspension will not take the jumps." "It will have to." Anthony slammed the transmission into gear. The crawler lurched forward, just as a stray plasma bolt from a drone scorched the ground where they had been standing. They careened down the ravine, bouncing violently over the uneven ground. Behind them, the battle between the biological nightmare and the mechanical coldness of the Combine raged. The beast had crushed one drone and was being strafed by the other two. Anthony didn't look back. He drove with a focus that bordered on trance. He felt the terrain through the wheels, correcting slides before they happened, finding traction on surfaces that should have been impossible to drive on. For 20 minutes, they ran the gauntlet of the glass maze. Finally, the terrain smoothed out, turning into the familiar dusty dunes of the Cinderfall Desert. The silence returned to the cabin, broken only by the whimpers of the injured man and the groaning of the abused suspension. Anthony slowed the crawler to a steady cruising speed. He let out a breath, his hands cramping on the wheel. Sarah turned to him. She looked at his hands, then up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, but her ears were relaxed, no longer pinned back in aggression. "You," she said softly, "are not just a junk repairman." Anthony kept his eyes on the horizon. "I fix things. That is all. You hacked a guidance system with a plasma cutter. You understood the acoustic biology of a subterranean predator. And you set a trap using enemy drones as bait." Sarah shook her head slowly. "That is not fixing. That is tactical engineering, military grade." Anthony tightened his jaw. "I read a lot of manuals." "Stop lying," Sarah said. But this time she reached out. Her hand, warm and covered in a rough tactical glove, covered his hand on the gear stick. She squeezed it just for a second. "And I am not just a neighbor in a tent." Anthony looked at her. He saw the scars on her neck that were usually hidden by her collar. He saw the way her eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, not like a refugee, but like a soldier waiting for an ambush. "I know," Anthony said quietly. "Refugees do not know how to distinguish between a search pattern and a kill grid." They looked at each other, a moment of shared, heavy understanding passing between them. Two people wearing masks, recognizing the cracks in each other's disguises. "Papa," Poppy's voice broke the moment. She sounded small. "Look at the sky." Anthony looked up. The bloom was still churning, the black auroras dancing. But cutting through them was something else. A stark, bright orange beam of light was sweeping across the clouds, originating from the Combine Tower at the center of the sector. It swept back and forth like a lighthouse beam. Then it stopped. It was pointing directly at them. The beam locked onto the crawler, bathing the dusty ground around them in an eerie, synthetic glow. "They are tracking us," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a growl. "They know we have the seed, and they know we have the witnesses." Anthony looked at the orange light, then down at the veil seed sitting on the dashboard. It was pulsing faster now, as if responding to the beam. "They marked us," Anthony said. He shifted gears, pushing the engine harder. "We are not going back to a welcome party. We are going back to a siege." He looked at Sarah. "Still want that date?" Sarah checked the charge on her kinetic pistol. She bared her teeth in a smile that was terrifying and beautiful. "Only if we survive the night, old nerd. Drive." The crawler sped toward Wisp Harbor, a tiny speck of defiance racing against the storm and the inevitable weight of the debt that was about to come due. The medical scanner hummed with a sound that was perilously close to a whine, a frequency that grated against the already frayed nerves of everyone in the small, repurposed shipping container that served as the clinic of Wisp Harbor. Outside, the wind was picking up again, carrying the heavy, static-charged dust of the approaching bloom. But inside, the air was still and smelled sharply of antiseptic and ozone. Dr. Keene adjusted the magnification on the holographic display, her frown deepening until it etched deep lines into her leathery skin. She did not look at Sarah Vera, who was standing by the door, with her arms crossed and her tail wrapped tight around her leg, a sign of extreme anxiety that Anthony had learned to recognize over the last 48 hours. "It is not an infection," Dr. Keene said, her voice rough with fatigue. "Look at the blood sample." Anthony leaned in his thick spectacles, sliding down his nose. On the screen, the magnified blood cells of Rowan Sarah's son were visible. But they were not moving naturally. Interspersed among the red and white cells were jagged microscopic flecks of something that glittered like diamond dust. And they were vibrating. "Is that metal?" Anthony asked. "It is heavy metal particulate," Dr. Keene corrected. "But it is magnetized, and not just magnetically active, it is resonant. Every time the atmospheric pressure shifts outside because of the bloom, these particles spin. They are tearing his capillaries apart from the inside. It is like he has a thunderstorm in his veins." Sarah let out a sound that was half whimper, half growl. "He was fine 2 weeks ago. He was playing in the crater." "The crater has high concentrations of veil dust," Dr. Keene said, stepping back and wiping her hands on a rag. "He inhaled it. Usually the body filters it out, but Rowan is a hybrid. His physiology is hypersensitive to the bloom's frequency. The dust is acting as a receiver." Rowan lay on the biobed, asleep, but restless. The faint, iridescent glow under his skin was pulsing in time with the distant rhythmic thrumming of the ventilation fans. "So we filter his blood," Anthony suggested, his engineer brain looking for a mechanical solution. "Dialysis would take 12 hours, Dr. Keene shook her head. "The bloom peaks in less than 10. If the atmospheric resonance hits maximum, while that dust is in his system, the friction will boil his blood. Literally." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a hull. However, Dr. Keene continued, walking over to a shielded metal box on the counter. She opened it. Inside sat the veil seed. It was a black geometric artifact, no larger than a fist, pulsing with a violet light that seemed to breathe. "When you brought this in," the doctor said, pointing at the seed, "I noticed something. Look at the monitor." She moved the veil seed closer to the biobed. Immediately, the jagged movements of the particles on the screen smoothed out. They stopped spinning and aligned perfectly, flowing harmlessly with the blood. "It stabilizes the field," Anthony realized. "It is generating a counterpulse." "Exactly," Dr. Keene nodded. "It is a dampener. If we keep the seed within 2 meters of the boy, it locks the particles in place. He will sleep through the bloom, and tomorrow, when the magnetic storm passes, I can safely filter his blood." Sarah exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "So he is safe, as long as we keep that thing near him." "He is medically safe," Dr. Keene said, closing the box but leaving it on the bedside table. "But tactically, you have just put a target on his back the size of a moon." Anthony looked at the seed. It was the prize the Asterian Combine wanted. It was the key to whatever Malcor Rane was planning. And now, it was the only thing keeping a 7-year-old boy alive. "Then the target is on us," Anthony said quietly. "We just have to make sure no one knows we have it." But in a place like Wisp Harbor, secrets leaked faster than air from a punctured suit. By noon, the mood in the settlement had shifted. The relief of the rescue mission had evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of the bloom. The sky was a bruising purple dark auroras, dancing like oil on water, and the static electricity was making everyone irritable. Anthony stood in the line at the water reclamation station, Poppy beside him. She was unusually quiet, clutching her datapad. "Papa," she whispered. "People are staring." Anthony did not turn his head. He adjusted his collar. "Let them stare. We are the most interesting thing that has happened here since the reactor leak of '98. It was not just staring. It was glaring. A group of miners stood near the pumps, their faces smeared with grease and suspicion. They were talking loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to claim plausible deniability. "Saw the manifest," one of them spat. "That pod was supposed to have filters, new ones. Now we are stuck breathing recycled grit for another month because the rescue team prioritized data." "And the alien," another muttered. "Ever since she pitched her tent, the bloom has been getting worse. My grandmother used to say foxkin bring storms. They draw the static." "I heard the pod didn't crash," a third voice added, a man with a bandage over one eye. "I heard she let it into the ravine. Scavengers work with the raiders, you know. Probably stripped the filters before the old nerd even got there." Anthony felt a muscle in his jaw jump. He placed a hand on Poppy's shoulder to keep her from marching over there. She looked ready to throw her datapad at them. "Wait here," Anthony said to her. He walked over to the group. He did not walk like a soldier. He walked like a tired mechanic with a bad back, slouching slightly. The miners went silent as he approached. "You have something to say about the filters?" Anthony asked, his voice mild. "We are just saying it is convenient," the bandaged man sneered. "You come back with no hardware, just a black box, and suddenly the Combine is locking down the sector. Seems like bad luck follows that neighbor of yours." Anthony looked at the man. He looked at the crowd, gathering, watching. He saw Sarah, standing at the edge of the perimeter, holding a canister. She had frozen, her ears flat, waiting for the inevitable rejection. She was used to being the scapegoat. Anthony took off his spectacles and polished them on his jumpsuit. "The pod was stripped by a subterranean resonance burrower," Anthony said calmly. "We saved 4 crew members. If we had tried to salvage the filters, we would have been eaten. I prioritized lives over air scrubbers. If you have a problem with that math, you can take it up with me." "And the fox," the miner challenged. "She is the one who sniffed out the path. Maybe she sniffed out the loot too." Anthony put his spectacles back on. The glass hid the sudden cold shift in his eyes. For a second, just a split second, the old nerd vanished, replaced by the man who had once designed kill grids for orbital defense platforms. "Sarah Vera dragged a man with a crushed leg 2 miles through a glass storm," Anthony said. His voice did not rise, but it carried a chill that cut through the humidity of the room. "She risked her life for strangers who would not even offer her a drink of water. If you want to blame someone for the bad luck, blame me. I am the one who drove the crawler. I am the one who brought the bad news." He stepped closer, invading the miner's personal space. "I have a lot of experience being a target," Anthony whispered, low enough that only the man could hear. "I make a very bad punching bag. I tend to break the hand that hits me." The miner blinked, unsettled by the sudden menace radiating from the hunched-up mechanic. He stepped back, grumbling. "Just saying. It is weird, that is all." The group dispersed, muttering. Anthony turned. Sarah was looking at him. Her expression was shocked. Her mouth was slightly open, showing the tips of her canines. In her world, a world of survival and transactions, people defended you only if they owed you money or if they wanted something. Anthony gave her a curt nod, then walked back to Poppy. "That was cool," Poppy whispered, her eyes shining. "You did the scary, quiet voice." "I was just correcting the record," Anthony muttered, picking up their water canister. "Let's go." 2 hours later, a courier drone hovered in front of Anthony's workshop. It projected a holographic invitation. "Director Malcor Rain requests the pleasure of your company. Tea, now." "Tea," Anthony read the message. He wants to negotiate. Or arrest you, Poppy said helpfully, from under a pile of scrap. If he wanted to arrest me, he would have sent a squad, Anthony said. He thinks he can buy me. It is insulting, really. But I have to go. Why? Because if I say no, he will wonder what I am hiding. If I go and act like a greedy scavenger, he will think he understands me. Predictability is the best camouflage. Anthony arrived at the Combine's temporary command module, a sleek, white structure that looked like a spaceship had landed in the middle of a junk pile. The air inside was filtered, smelling of lemon and fabricated oxygen, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of the outside world. Malcor Ron sat behind a desk made of real wood, an obscenely expensive luxury, on a moon with no trees. He was sipping from a porcelain cup. Mr. Hale, Malcor smiled. It was a shark smile. Please, sit, sugar. I prefer oil, Anthony said dryly, remaining standing. What do you want, Director? Direct. I like that. Malcor set the cup down. Let us skip the pleasantries. You have the veil seed. I know you do. The medical scanner in the clinic pinged a specific resonance frequency about 3 hours ago. You are using it to treat the Vulpine's brat. Anthony's heart hammered, but his face remained a mask of boredom. It is a paperweight. Pretty light. The kid likes it. It is a key, Malcor said, leaning forward. A key to an architectural anomaly buried beneath Echo Spire. A precursor structure. The Combine is very interested in historical preservation. I bet, Anthony said. Does preservation usually involve orbital bombardment protocols? I saw your ship's holding position. Malcor chuckled. Security. The bloom makes people do crazy things. Look, Anthony, can I call you Anthony? You are a man of simple means. You fix garbage for a living. You have a daughter, a bright girl. I have looked at her aptitude scores. She is wasting away in this dust bowl. Malcor opened a drawer and slid a credit chip across the desk. 50,000 credits, Malcor said softly. Enough to buy a ticket to the core worlds. Real schools for Poppy, real air, a house with a garden, all for a useless black box. Anthony looked at the chip. It was more money than he had seen in 10 years. It was freedom. It was safety. It was blood money. He looked up at Malcor. He saw the arrogance in the man's eyes, the belief that everyone had a price. 50,000, Anthony repeated. 60 if you bring it to me within the hour, Malcor added. Anthony picked up the chip. He turned it over in his fingers. It is a generous offer, Anthony said. But the thing is, I promised the kid he could keep it until the storm passes. And I never break a promise to a child. He tossed the chip back onto the desk. It spun and rattled before coming to a stop. After the bloom, Anthony lied smoothly. Then we can talk business. Right now it is keeping a patient alive. Even the Combine has medical ethics, right? Malcor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went dead. Ethics are a luxury of the safe Mr. Hale. The bloom peaks tonight. I need that seed tonight. Then you better pray the storm passes quickly, Anthony said, because if you try to take it while the boy is hooked up to it, the resonance feedback will fry his brain. And I do not think you want the PR nightmare of killing a refugee child over a historical artifact. Anthony turned and walked to the door. Anthony, Malcor called out. Anthony paused. Everyone is a hero until the check clears, Malcor said. Or until their house burns down. Be careful with your choices. Anthony walked out without looking back. But as soon as the airlock hissed shut behind him, his old man slouch disappeared. He strode toward the refugee sector, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rooftop. The negotiation was a sham. Malcor was not going to wait. By the time Anthony got back to the perimeter of the drift, the sun had set. The sky was a terrifying light show ribbons, of black and neon violet tearing through the atmosphere. The bloom was singing now, a constant low-frequency thrum that made teeth ache. He found Poppy outside Sarah's tent. She was crouched in the dirt, holding a UV flashlight. "Papa, look," she said, pointing at the ground. Anthony knelt. In the dust, there were tracks. But they were not footprints. They were small, rhythmic indentations. Three-pronged. "Drone," Anthony whispered. "Micro scouts." "They are too regular," Poppy said, tracing the pattern. "And look, no smell. No smell." "Usually drones smell like ozone and lubricant," Poppy explained. "These passed by, but the air is clean. That means they are using stealth coding. High-end military tech." "They are mapping the perimeter," Anthony realized. "Searching for a breach point. Malcor is not waiting for me to change my mind. He is preparing a raid." He stood up, looking at the fragile structures of the tent city. Canvas and scrap metal. No defense against a tactical extraction team. "Go inside," Anthony ordered Poppy. "Stay with Sarah and Rowan. Do not come out." "What are you going to do?" "I am going to do some gardening," Anthony said grimly. For the next hour, Anthony worked in a fever state. He scavenged solar panels from a derelict water heater. He pulled copper wiring from a dead generator. He used the rest of the supplies from his crawler. He wasn't building a wall. He was building a grid. He laid the panels flat under the sand, around Sarah's tent, connecting them to a capacitor bank he had jury-rigged from a mining battery. He wired the perimeter with trip sensors made from laser pointers and light-sensitive diodes. Sarah emerged from the tent just as he was burying the last wire. She held a steaming mug in her hands. She watched him pack the sand down over a pressure plate. "You are building a localized EMP field," she observed. Anthony jumped slightly. He hadn't heard her approach. "Jesus, you walk quietly." "Fox," she pointed to her ears. "We are good at sneaking." "What is the plan? Fry their circuits." "If a stealth drone crosses this line," Anthony pointed to the invisible boundary, "the capacitor will discharge a 4,000-volt pulse into the ground. It will overload their stealth coding and fry their guidance chips. They will drop like flies." Sarah looked at the crude, ugly setup. It looked like trash scattered in the sand. But to her trained eye, it was a work of art. A kill zone disguised as a junk pile. "You are a nerd, Anthony Hale," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "But you are a dangerous nerd." "I just want a quiet night," Anthony muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Is the heater working? The temperature is dropping." "It is sputtering," Sarah said. "The dust is clogging the intake. I will take a look." Inside the tent it was warm but dim. Rowan was asleep, the veil seed glowing softly on the table next to him, casting long purple shadows against the canvas walls. Anthony knelt by the heater unit in the corner. He popped the casing off. "Yeah, the filter is shot. I can bypass it, but it will be noisy." "Noisy is fine," Sarah said. She was sitting on a crate nearby, watching him. "Better than freezing." Anthony worked in silence for a moment. He could feel her eyes on him. It made the back of his neck prickle, but not in a bad way. It was a comfortable weight. He reached for a wrench, but his hand brushed against something soft. Fur. He froze. Sarah's tail had uncurled. It was resting on the floor, the tip brushing against his wrist. He looked up. Sarah wasn't pulling away. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. The guard was down. The survivor mask had slipped, revealing a woman who was just tired. And lonely. "Sorry," Anthony stammered, pulling his hand back. I didn't mean to." "I didn't move it," Sarah said softly. The air in the tent seemed to charge with something stronger than the bloom static. "Anthony," she said, "why did you turn down the money? Poppy told me about the offer." 50,000. You could have left. You could have been safe. I do not leave people behind, Anthony, said his voice husky. Not anymore. We are not your people, Sarah said, but there was no bite in it. We are just a complication. You are neighbors, Anthony said, focusing intently on the heater's screw. And Poppy likes you. She needs a role model who isn't a grumpy old mechanic. I am not a role model, Sarah let out a bitter laugh. I am a fugitive living in a tent. You are a mother who fought a monster for her kid, Anthony said. He finally fixed the fan and snapped the casing shut. The heater roared to life, blowing warm air. He turned to face her. They were close. In the small tent there wasn't much room for distance. And, Anthony added, risking a glance at her amber eyes, I prefer dangerous women. They are easier to talk to. Sarah's ears twitched. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She leaned forward just an inch. Don't worry, old nerd, she whispered. I only bite bad people. For a second, Anthony thought he might kiss her, or she might kiss him. The magnetic pull was undeniable. Then, the tent flap flew open. Warden Halston stumbled in breathless. His uniform was torn and he was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. The romantic tension shattered like glass. Sarah was on her feet in a millisecond, her kinetic pistol in her hand. Anthony grabbed his wrench. Halston, Anthony asked. What happened? They hit the perimeter, Halston wheezed, collapsing onto a crate. Not drones. Mercenaries. They bypassed the main gate. The Combine, Sarah asked. Asterian security, Halston nodded. But they are not here for a raid. They are setting up a perimeter around Echo Spire. Anthony, the intel was real. Halston took a gulp of water. Sarah handed him. I intercepted a comms packet, Halston said. They are not just opening the structure. They are activating a toll gate. Oh, what? Poppy asked, poking her head out from behind the sleeping curtain. A hyperspace toll gate, Anthony realized, his face paling. The structure beneath Echo Spire is a directional wormhole generator. If they activate it, Wisp Harbor won't be a mining outpost anymore. It will be the only stable entry point for 3 sectors. Exactly, Halston said. Every ship, every trade route, every refugee transport, they will all have to pass through here. And the Combine will own the key. They will tax the oxygen we breathe. They will turn this moon into a fortress. And to open it, Sarah whispered, looking at the Veil Seed, they need the resonance key. They need to insert the seed into the Spire's control interface, exactly when the bloom peaks, Anthony said. That aligns the dimensional shear. If they miss the window, the gate stays closed for another 50 years. When is the peak? Sarah asked. 4 hours, Anthony checked his watch. We have to destroy it, Sarah said, reaching for her pistol. If we destroy the seed, they can't open the gate. If we destroy the seed, Dr. Keene's voice came from the comms unit on the table. Rowan dies. I am monitoring his vitals remotely. The feedback loop is holding, but barely. If that signal stops, his blood boils in minutes. They were checkmated. They couldn't give up the seed without condemning the sector to tyranny. They couldn't destroy it without killing the boy. There is another way, Anthony said slowly. He looked at the floor, his mind drifting back to a time he had tried very hard to forget. I know how the Spire works, Anthony said, because I helped design the interface. Sarah froze. She turned to look at him. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced by a sharp, fearful calculation. You said you were a mechanic, she said. I was a structural resonance engineer, Anthony admitted. Project Silhouette, 10 years ago. We were trying to stabilize natural wormholes using precursor tech. The Asterian Combine funded it. He looked at his hands. They were trembling again. We pushed the resonance too hard, Anthony whispered. We thought we could control the bloom. We were wrong. The feedback pulse didn't just open a door. It shattered the containment field of the habitat ring. He looked up, tears stinging his eyes. My wife was on that ring. Half the colony was. They didn't die. They just dissolved into the static. The tent was silent. Even Poppy was staring at him, her mouth open. She had never heard the story. That is why I came here, Anthony said. To the edge of nowhere. To hide from the tech I helped build. Sarah was looking at him, but she wasn't looking at him with judgment. She was looking at him with recognition. Her hands were clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She was hiding a shiver. She knew Project Silhouette. She knew it intimately. But she bit her lip and swallowed the words, threatening to spill out. So, you know how to stop it? Sarah asked, her voice, steady but strained. I know how to invert the signal, Anthony said. We don't destroy the seed. We take it to the spire. We plug it in. But instead of opening the gate, we use the seed to broadcast a jamming signal. We lock the gate permanently. That means walking into the lion's den, Halston warned. Malcor has a legion of mechs at the spire. We sneak in, Sarah said. I can guide us. Crack. The sound of a gunshot echoed from outside. Not a kinetic round, a plasma discharge. The trap, Anthony yelled. He scrambled out of the tent. In the darkness, sparks were flying from his makeshift grid. A drone had hit the tripwire and exploded, but behind it shadows were moving. Human shadows. Clear the area, a voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed. We have a warrant for the seizure of stolen corporate property. They are not waiting, Anthony shouted. Sarah, grab the seed, get rowing. Bye. Before they could move, a laser sight painted a red dot on Poppy's chest. Papa! Poppy screamed. Don't move, Anthony roared, throwing himself in front of her. A figure stepped out of the gloom. It was Brannick, the rock-skinned miner. But he was being held at gunpoint by a heavy combat mech. Brannick was bleeding, his rocky hide cracked. I am sorry, Anthony, Brannick groaned. They caught me at the perimeter. Let him go, Anthony shouted at the mech. The seed, the mech pilot's voice rasped through an external speaker. Place it on the ground, or the rockman crumbles. And then we start shooting the tent. Anthony looked at Sarah. She was holding the box with the seed. If she gave it up, the Combine won. If she didn't, Brannick died. And then they all died. But worse, if she gave it up, Rowan would die as soon as the seed was moved out of range. Sarah looked at Anthony. Her eyes were pleading. Do something, nerd. Do something dangerous. Anthony looked at the red dot dancing on his chest. He looked at Poppy, terrified, behind him. He looked at the dust swirling around them, the dust that had taken his wife, the dust that was killing Rowan, the dust that Malcor wanted to sell for profit. Something inside Anthony Hale snapped. It was the final support beam of the peaceful mechanic persona giving way. You want the seed, Anthony called out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote detonator, the one for the drone trap grid. I will give you a seed, Anthony muttered. He didn't hand over the box. He didn't surrender. He pressed the button. But not the button to disarm. He pressed the button to overload. The solar panels buried around the tent didn't just discharge a pulse, they exploded. Anthony had wired the lithium batteries to thermal runaway. Boom. A ring of sand and fire erupted around the tent, creating an instant wall of smoke and confusion. The mech stumbled back its sensors, blinded by the sudden flare. Run! Anthony screamed, grabbing Poppy. To the tunnels! Go to the terraforming tunnels! Sarah grabbed Rowan, wrapping him in the thermal blanket, with the seed pressed against his chest. Halston supported Brannick. They sprinted into the smoke away from the mechs, away from the safety of the tents. As they ran, plasma bolts sizzled past them, turning the sand into glass. Anthony didn't flinch. He wasn't cowering anymore. He reached into his belt and pulled out his flare gun. He didn't fire it into the air. He fired it straight back into a fuel drum near his workshop. The explosion shook the ground, a massive fireball, illuminating the night. "Anthony!" Sarah yelled over the roar. "You burned your shop." "I don't need a shop anymore," Anthony yelled back, his eyes burning with a cold, hard fire. "I am not fixing things tonight. I am breaking them." He looked at the towering silhouette of Echo Spire in the distance, bathed in the eerie light of the bloom. "We are going to the spire," Anthony declared. "And we are going to teach Malcor Rane that he picked the wrong dad to mess with." They vanished into the darkness of the old tunnels, leaving the burning wreckage of their past lives behind. The defense was over. The counterattack had begun. The sky above Wisp Harbor did not just darken. It bruised. The bloom had arrived early, defying every meteorological model the outpost possessed. It began with a low-frequency vibration, a sound felt in the marrow, rather than heard by the ear, as if the planet's iron core had suddenly decided to start shivering. The atmospheric shielding of the outpost groaned. Metal support beams hardened against vacuum, and radiation began to expand and contract rhythmically. It sounded like the entire settlement was breathing a wet metallic rasping that echoed through the thin walls of the refugee tents. "Papa," Poppy whispered, clutching her datapad to her chest. "The toaster is singing." Anthony Hale looked up from the diagnostic panel of the tunnel airlock. He adjusted his spectacles, his hands moving with a frantic precision. "It is not singing, Poppy. It is resonating. The magnetic shear is hitting 700 Teslas. Everything with a conductive coil is acting like a speaker." Outside, the darkness was absolute, save for the terrifying spectacle of the bloom. Black aurora's ribbons of anti-light that seemed to eat the stars twisted across the horizon. Where they touched the ground, static electricity arced in silent white explosions. "We have to go," Sarah Vera said. Her voice was tight, her ears flattened so hard against her skull they were almost invisible. She was carrying Rowan, who was wrapped in a thermal blanket, the Veil seed box pressed tight against his chest. Even through the box, the artifact was pulsing, syncing with the madness outside. "The crawler is dead," Warden Halston grunted, limping into the airlock antechamber. He was favoring his left leg, blood seeping through a hastily applied bandage. "The electromagnetic pulse fried the ignition coil. We are on foot." "Foot travel is suicide," Dr. Keene snapped, checking the charge on her medical emitter. "The radiation levels are spiking. We will be cooked in 20 minutes. "Not if we go down," Anthony said. He pointed to a rusted heavy-gauge wheel set into the rock wall of the maintenance bay. "The old terraformer tunnels, they run deep, below the magnetic interference layer." "Those tunnels have been sealed for 50 years, Halston argued. "The air scrubbers are ancient." "I fixed them," Anthony said. He didn't look at them. He grabbed the wheel and heaved. "Last year, when I was bored, I rerouted the auxiliary power. They breathe." The wheel shrieked a sound of metal tearing against metal, and the heavy blast door ground open. A blast of stale, warm air hit them. It smelled of dry earth and ancient coolant fluid. "In," Anthony commanded. "Now." As the group, Anthony, Sarah, Poppy, Rowan, Halston, Dr. Keene, and Brannock, the rock-skinned miner whose basalt hide was cracked and bleeding, scrambled into the dark, the ground shook violently. Above them, the sound of engines roared over the singing of the bloom. Not the erratic sputtering of mining ships, but the deep, synchronized thrum of military-grade thrusters. "The Combine," Sarah hissed, looking back at the slice of chaotic sky visible through the door. Through the dust, they saw them. Armored personnel carriers, sleek and black like beetles, were descending from the gloom. They didn't land. They slammed into the sand, crushing the empty tents of the drift. Floodlights cut through the dust, sweeping the area with blinding white beams. "They are not looking for survivors. Anthony realized his stomach turning to ice. They are sweeping the board. He grabbed the wheel and spun it shut. The heavy door slammed into place, sealing them in the dark, muffling the roar of the invasion to a dull thud. The terraformer tunnels were a relic of a failed dream. Decades ago, before the Asterian Combine turned Wisp Harbor into a mining pit, idealists had tried to turn the moon green. The walls were lined with calcified pipes and dead hydroponic trays, dusty ghosts of a garden that never bloomed. Anthony led the way with a hand-cranked kinetic flashlight, the only light source that didn't rely on batteries, which might explode in the magnetic storm. The beam cut a shaky path through the gloom. "We need to keep moving," Anthony said, his voice echoing softly. "This main artery leads to the tectonic stabilizer under Echospire. It is about 3 miles. 3 miles, Brannick rumbled, his voice grinding like stones rubbing together. "I can barely walk 300 feet, Anthony. My hydraulics are leaking." "Lean on me," Dr. Keene ordered, moving under the massive miner's arm. "You are not dying on my shift, you oversized paperweight." Sarah fell into step beside Anthony. In the claustrophobic darkness, the chemistry between them felt amplified, stripped of the distractions of the surface world. "You knew about these tunnels," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I like to have an exit strategy," Anthony muttered, keeping his eyes on the floor, checking for structural weakness. "You fixed the air scrubbers a year ago," Sarah pressed. "You have been planning to run for a long time." "I have a daughter," Anthony said defensively. "Paranoia is part of the job description." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. "I did not just interpret for transport crews," she whispered. Anthony stopped. He shone the light on the floor, avoiding her eyes. "I know. Interpreters do not know how to disable a combat mech with a solar flare." "I was a cleaner," Sarah confessed. The words hung in the stale air. "For the syndicates in the core worlds. When a deal went bad or when cargo needed to disappear, they called me. I have moved things that shouldn't exist. I have seen crates full of children. I have seen weapons that turned cities into glass." She took a shaky breath. "One day I looked at a manifest and realized I wasn't just moving cargo. I was moving the end of someone's world. That was the day I took the first shuttle out to the rim. I thought if I went far enough, the dirt wouldn't stick to me." She looked at Rowan, asleep on Brannick's other shoulder. "I thought I could be just a mother, but the dirt, it follows you." Anthony turned the light toward her face. In the harsh beam, she looked vulnerable, stripped of her warrior facade. "Why are you telling me this now?" Anthony asked. "Because I saw your face when you talked about Project Silhouette," Sarah said. "You look at yourself the same way I look at myself in the mirror. You think you are the monster." Anthony felt a surge of anger. Defensive hot anger. "I built engines. I didn't pull triggers." "You built the gun," Sarah said softly. "Does it matter who pulled the trigger?" Anthony wanted to pull away. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was just a victim of corporate negligence. But the lie tasted like ash in his mouth. "I knew the resonance was unstable," Anthony admitted, his voice cracking. "I knew. The math showed a 0.05% chance of cascade failure. But the Combine offered me a tenure track. They offered me funding. So I signed off on the safety protocols. I signed the paper that killed my wife." He looked at Sarah. Two broken people in a broken tunnel running from a storm they both helped create in different ways. "We are quite a pair," Anthony let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The architect of destruction and the cleaner of sins." "And the fox mom," Sarah added, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Don't forget that part." "Hey!" A small voice cut through the heavy atmosphere. Poppy was walking behind them. She poked Anthony in the lower back with her stylus. If you two are going to flirt and have a tragic backstory competition, can you do it quieter? Poppy whispered loudly. You are making the ground vibrate, and the giant worm monster upstairs loves drama. Anthony blinked, the tension snapping. He looked at his daughter. We are not flirting, Poppy. You are totally flirting. Poppy rolled her eyes. It is painful. Just hold hands or something so we can walk faster. Sarah chuckled, a low, throaty sound. She has your tactical awareness, old nerd. She has my inability to keep her mouth shut, Anthony grumbled, but he felt a weight lift off his chest. The secrets were out. They were ugly, but they were out, and the tunnel didn't collapse. They reached the junction beneath Echo Spire an hour later. The air here was hotter, humming with the energy of the massive structure above them. Warden Halston collapsed against a bulkhead, his face gray. I can't go up, he wheezed. The leg is done. Stay here with Brannock and the doctor, Anthony said, checking his gear. Sarah and I will take the seed up to the interface room. What is the plan, Anthony? Dr. Keene asked, applying a coagulant patch to Halston's leg. Realistically, we walk in, we plug it in, and then what we ask Malcor nicely to go away? Anthony opened his satchel. He pulled out 2 items. One was the Veil Seed. The other was a bulky, ancient-looking video camera, one that used physical magnetic tape. We use the seed, Anthony said, but not to open the gate. The spire works on a phase lock loop. It waits for the seed to provide a stabilization frequency. If I invert the phase of the seed right as it connects, it won't open the wormhole. It will cause a resonant collapse of the local aperture. English Papa, Poppy said. It will slam the door shut and weld the lock, Anthony translated. The spire will be useless, a 1 billion credit paperweight. Malcor will kill you, Halston warned. That is where this comes in. Anthony lifted the old camera. This is analog, no digital signal. The bloom can't scramble it. I am going to record everything, the extortion, the weaponization of the spire. The moment I trigger the collapse, this camera will be hardwired into the spire's emergency broadcast array. It sends a primitive radio wave unblockable. Every outpost, every independent trader, every patrol ship within 10 parsecs will see what the Combine did here. Mutually assured destruction of reputation, Sarah mused. The Combine can survive a failed mining project. They cannot survive the entire Rim turning against them for illegal weaponization of precursor tech. It is a gamble, Anthony admitted. If I miss the timing by a microsecond, the wormhole opens and Malcor wins. If I trigger it too early, the backlash could vaporize the tower. And us. So no pressure. Sarah checked her pistol. Just perfect timing or death. Story of my life, Anthony said. He looked at Poppy. You stay here, he ordered. With the doctor. Poppy looked like she was about to argue. Then she looked at Rowan, who was shivering again, as the bloom intensified. Fix it, Papa, Poppy said, her voice small. Fix it so we can go home. Anthony knelt and kissed her forehead. It was a mixture of grease, sweat, and dust. I will fix it, I promise. He stood up and nodded to Sarah. Ready? Always, she said. They climbed the maintenance ladder, ascending into the belly of the beast. The control room of Echo Spire was a cathedral of alien geometry. The walls were made of a dark obsidian-like material that seemed to absorb the light. In the center of the room stood the interface, a pedestal of white crystal that hummed with a bone-shaking intensity. The view through the massive panoramic viewports was apocalyptic. The bloom was at its peak. The sky outside was a swirling vortex of black and purple fire. Lightning struck the spire repeatedly, charging the structure. But the room was not empty. Director Malcor Rane stood by the interface. He was not wearing his suit anymore. He was wearing a tactical exoskeleton, sleek and white, that amplified his movements. Flanking him were 6 heavy combat droids, their weapons leveled at the door. He didn't look surprised to see them. "Mr. Hale," Malcor's voice boomed, amplified by the suit. "And Ms. Vera, you are late. The party is starting." Anthony stepped out of the shadows, holding the veil seat in one hand and the camera in the other. Sarah moved to his flank, her pistol raised low against the droid's. It was little more than a toy. "The party is over, Malcor," Anthony said, his voice steady. "The tunnels are sealed. The refugees are hidden. You have nothing to leverage." "Nothing," Malcor smiled. He tapped a command on his wrist gauntlet. A holographic screen flared to life in the air between them. It showed a grainy thermal image. It was the tunnel junction below. Halston, Dr. Keene, Brannick, Poppy, Rowan. They were surrounded. 3 stealth drones had bypassed Anthony's sensors and were hovering silently above the group. "I tracked your heat signatures through the vents," Malcor said casually. "My drones are equipped with nerve agent injectors. One command and your daughter stops breathing in 30 seconds. It is a very peaceful way to go." Anthony froze. The blood drained from his face. His plan, the inversion, the broadcast relied on him having nothing to lose. "Let them go," Anthony choked out. "Give me the seed," Malcor extended his hand, "and I will recall the drones. I will even let you all leave. I will give you a shuttle. You can fly away to whatever dustball you want. I just want the spire." "You are lying," Sarah said, her voice vibrating with a low growl. "You will kill us the moment you have the key." "Maybe," Malcor shrugged. "But do you want to test that theory with your son's life?" "Look at him." On the screen, Rowan was convulsing. Without the seed nearby, the bloom was tearing him apart. "He has maybe 10 minutes, Malcor said. "Give me the seed. I open the gate. The atmosphere stabilizes. The boy lives. You leave. It is a simple transaction." Anthony looked at the screen. Poppy was holding Rowan's hand. She looked terrified. He looked at the seed. If he gave it up, Wisp Harbor became a dictatorship. If he didn't, Poppy died. It was the impossible choice. The choice that breaks men. "Anthony," Sarah said. Her voice was uncharacteristically calm. He turned to her. She was looking at him with an intensity that burned. "I want you to live," she said. "I want us to have a chance. But I also want you to stop letting the past drive the car." "Sarah, he has Poppy," Anthony whispered, his hand shaking so hard the seed rattled. "I know," Sarah said. She stepped forward. She lowered her pistol. "Sarah," Anthony asked, confusion clouding his panic. She turned to him. "Give it to me, Anthony." "What? Give me the seed," Sarah said firmly. "He is right. We cannot win this fight. Not with guns. Not with clever tricks. We have to survive." "Sarah, no." Anthony stepped back. "If he opens the gate. If he doesn't, Rowan dies." Sarah screamed, her composure cracking. "My son dies. Your daughter dies. Give it to me." She snatched the seed from Anthony's frozen hand. She walked toward Malcor. Anthony stood there paralyzed. He couldn't shoot her. He couldn't stop her. He felt a sense of betrayal so profound it felt like a physical blow to the gut. She was doing it. She was selling out the world to save her child. Just like he had done 10 years ago. "Smart girl," Malcor smiled, deactivating his helmet. "Bring it here." Sarah walked up to the pedestal. She held the seed out. "Let the drones go first," Sarah demanded. Malcor laughed. "You are in no position to negotiate. Then I smash it." Sarah raised the seed high. "I will smash it against this crystal. It will shatter, and your gate stays closed forever." Malcor hesitated. He looked at her eyes. They were wild, desperate, the eyes of a mother cornered. "Fine." Malcor tapped his wrist. "Drones stand down. Return to orbit." On the screen, the drones backed away and zoomed up the ventilation shaft. "Now," Malcor said. "The seed." Sarah looked at Anthony one last time. Her expression was unreadable. Was it apology? Was it shame? She placed the veil seed into the receptacle on the interface. Hum! The spire roared. A beam of pure white energy shot up from the crystal, punching through the roof straight into the heart of the bloom. The room shook violently. Gravity seemed to twist. Yes! Malcor shouted, his arms raised in triumph. The aperture is aligning. The gate is opening. Anthony fell to his knees. He had failed. The Combine had won. Sarah had betrayed him. Get out of here, Sarah yelled at Anthony, backing away from the pedestal. Take the kids and run. Why? Anthony whispered, looking at her across the widening gap of the shaking floor. Why, Sarah? She didn't answer. She just looked at him, sadness etched into every line of her face. Suddenly the blast doors to the control room began to close. The Spire's automated lockdown protocol was engaging. Anthony, move! Sarah screamed. Anthony scrambled back, diving through the closing doors just as they slammed shut. He was on the outside. Sarah and Malcor were locked inside the control room. He pounded on the thick metal. Sarah, open it. Inside the room, the sound was deafening. Malcor was laughing, watching the energy levels climb. Sarah stood by the pedestal. She wasn't looking at Malcor. She was looking at the door where Anthony had disappeared. Then she looked down at the interface console. Below the tunnels in the safety of the junction, Poppy watched the feed on her datapad, the connection Anthony had set up. She watched Sarah hand over the seed. She watched the door close. Dr. Keene shook her head. She broke. The pressure was too much. Poppy stared at the screen, her brow furrowed. She replayed the moment Sarah snatched the seed. She looked at the way Sarah had held it. No, Poppy whispered. She didn't break. What do you mean? Brannick asked. She is a fox, Poppy said, a strange mix of fear and awe in her voice. She didn't give it to him because she was scared. Poppy looked at the schematic of the seed that Anthony had shown her days ago. She gave it to him, Poppy said, because she knows something he doesn't. Back at the blast door, Anthony slumped against the cold metal. The spire was screaming now, a sound that tore at the soul. The bloom was pouring into the chamber. He was alone. The woman he had started to love was locked in a room with a monster and a machine that was about to tear the sky open. And for the first time in 10 years, Anthony Hale didn't have a plan. He only had the crushing weight of silence where her heartbeat used to be. The heavy, pressurized silence of the blast door was not empty. It was filled with the frantic drumming of Anthony Hale's own heart and the muffled screaming roar of the echo spire coming to life on the other side. He slumped against the cold metal, his forehead resting on the rivets. For 10 seconds, he allowed himself to be the broken man. He allowed the crushing weight of Sarah's betrayal, or what looked like betrayal, to flatten his lungs. She had given Malcor the seed. She had chosen the transaction. Papa! The voice was small, coming from the shadows of the ventilation grate above the door. Poppy dropped down, landing with a soft thud. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked furious. Get up, Poppy said. She held out the datapad. You are doing the sad, slumped hero pose. We do not have time for the pose. She gave it to him, Poppy, Anthony whispered, his voice cracking. She traded the world for... She is a fox, Papa, Poppy interrupted, grabbing his hand and pulling with all her 12-year-old strength. Foxes do not trade. They trick. Now get up. The doctor says the resonance is climbing too fast. If we stay here, we melt. Anthony looked at his daughter. He saw the grease on her nose, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. It was like looking into a mirror from 20 years ago before the grief had rusted him over. He took a deep breath. The air tasted of ozone and burning copper. He stood up. You are right, Anthony said, adjusting his spectacles. The pose is counterproductive. He turned to the group emerging from the shadows of the lower maintenance deck. Warden Halston was leaning heavily on Brannock, whose rock-like skin was shedding dust with every step. Dr. Keene was checking the charge on her archaic medical emitter. "We cannot go through the door," Anthony said, his mind shifting gears from victim to engineer. "So we go up the wall." "Brannock, do you have any climbing anchors left in your utility belt?" "I am a walking anchor, Anthony," Brannock rumbled. "Good. We are climbing the exoskeleton of the spire." Anthony pointed to the external maintenance rungs, visible through a crack in the masonry. "Malcor is inside controlling the software. We are going to go outside and kick the hardware until it breaks." The climb was a nightmare of physics and vertigo. The spire was not just a building. It was a tuning fork the size of a mountain. As the Combine activated the veil seed inside, the entire structure began to vibrate. They climbed to the external lattice wind, whipping at them with the force of a hurricane. The sky above was no longer a sky. It was a boiling cauldron of black and violet energy. The bloom was fully open. The space around the spire was distorting heat shimmers that weren't caused by heat, but by reality, stretching thin. "Don't look down!" Dr. Keene shouted, over the roar, securing a rope around Poppy's waist. "I am not looking down," Poppy yelled back. "I am looking at the distortion waves. The light is bending at 30 degrees. "It is beautiful." Anthony led the way, his hands bleeding inside his gloves as he hauled himself up rung after rung. The sound of the spire was changing. It was no longer a mechanical hum. It was a voice, a singing, mournful, multitonal choir that seemed to be coming from the clouds themselves. They reached the observation deck level, an open-air gantry that ringed the top of the spire. The scene below was chaos. The Combine forces had established a perimeter at the base. Tanks, mechs, and hundreds of soldiers were holding the line. But they were not facing outward. They were firing wildly into the dust. "What are they shooting at?" Halston wheezed, collapsing onto the grating. "The dinner bell," Anthony realized, looking at the vibrating metal beneath his boots. "The spire is broadcasting a massive seismic lure. Every subterranean predator within 100 miles just woke up and thinks it is feeding time." As he spoke, the ground at the base of the spire erupted. Great geysers of sand and glass shot into the air. The resonance burrowers, not just one, but dozens of them, surged from the earth. Their armored bodies glistened in the strobe light of plasma fire. They were blind, maddened by the vibration, and they were tearing into the Combine lines with the fury of nature scorned. "It is a meat grinder down there," Brannock said, his stone face grim. "We are not safe here either," Anthony said. He pointed to the sky. "The drones." A squadron of Combine hunter-killers, sleek and lethal, was peeling off from the main battle, rising toward the gantry. They had spotted the climbers. "We have no weapons," Dr. Keene shouted. "My medical emitter is not going to scare a gunship." Anthony looked at the approaching drones. He looked at the vibrating spire. He looked at his tool belt. Empty. "Poppy," Anthony said suddenly, "give me the module." "What?" Poppy blinked. "The storyteller." Anthony snapped his fingers. "The one I built for you when you were 5. To help you sleep." Poppy dug into her oversized pocket and pulled out a clunky rectangular device, wrapped in colorful electrical tape. "You mean the universe lullaby machine, Papa. This plays twinkly noises." "It is a variable pulse generator," Anthony corrected, grabbing it. "I told you it was a storyteller because you wouldn't sleep unless the white noise had a rhythm. It generates complex, non-repeating acoustic patterns." He ripped the back off the device and jammed it into the exposed maintenance port of the spire's external lighting array. "What are you doing?" Halston asked. "Improvising a rhythm section," Anthony muttered. "The burrowers hunt by vibration. The drones navigate by sonar. Right now, it is just noise down there. I am going to give them a beat." He hot-wired the toy into the massive amplification grid of the spire. Poppy hit the green button, the adventure setting. Poppy smashed the button. Thumb, thumb, crack. Thumb, thumb, crack. The sound blasted from the spire's external speakers, not a nursery rhyme this time, but a deep, driving, syncopated percussion. It was the sound of a heartbeat amplified to the volume of a thunderclap. Below, the effect was instant. The resonance burrowers stopped thrashing wildly. They turned. The rhythm mimicked the footfalls of a titanic alpha predator. Anthony grabbed the microphone, attached to the maintenance panel. "Everyone!" he shouted to his group. "Stomp on the beat now!" "You are insane," Dr. Keene yelled, but she began to stomp her heavy combat boots on the metal grating. Thumb, thumb, crack. Anthony, Brannick, Halston, and Poppy joined in. They became a human drum circle on top of the world. The burrowers reacted. They didn't attack the spire. They attacked the source of the interference, the combine tanks that were firing out of rhythm. The beasts swarmed over the combine lines like a living tide of armor and teeth, ignoring the spire itself, driven by the artificial beat Anthony was conducting. The drones in the air wavered. The sonic pressure was messing with their gyroscopes. "It is working," Poppy cheered, jumping up and down. "It is a dance party." "It is a distraction," Anthony said, disconnecting the device. "Now we go inside." He blew the lock on the maintenance hatch with a small charge he had saved. The door swung open. They were in the upper gallery of the control room. The situation inside was not what Anthony expected. He expected to see Sarah in chains. He expected to see Malcor triumphant. Instead, he saw Malcor Rhine trapped in his own exoskeleton. The director was thrashing near the interface pedestal, his suit jerking spasmodically. Sarah Vera stood 10 feet away. She was not bound. She was holding her kinetic pistol, but she wasn't firing it. She was just watching. "Sarah," Anthony shouted, sliding down the ladder. Sarah turned. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and when she saw him, filled with a relief that nearly buckled her knees. "You took your time, old nerd," she called out. "What did you do?" Anthony ran to her side, checking her for injuries. "I thought you gave him the seed." "I did," Sarah nodded at the pedestal. The veil seed was slotted into the crystal, glowing blindly. "But I added a little garnish." "Garnish. The scent marker." Sarah tapped her neck. "Before I handed it over, I rubbed my thumb over the quantum pheromone gland under my collar. Vulpine biology. We use it to mark territory." Anthony stared at her. "You peed on the alien artifact." "I marked it with a chemical signature that bonds at a subatomic level," Sarah corrected indignantly. When the spire activated, it scanned the seed. It detected the marker, and then it scanned the room for the source of that marker. She pointed at Malcor. "I patted him on the shoulder when I gave him the box," Sarah smirked. "The spire thinks he is the foreign contaminant. The facility's automated defense grid is trying to quarantine him." Malcor screamed as the gravity field around him intensified, pinning him to the floor. "Turn it off. The pressure." "It is crushing the suit." The betrayal. Anthony breathed the realization washing over him like cool water. It was camouflage. "I told you," Sarah said softly, her eyes searching his. "I am a cleaner. I don't fight fair. I fight dirty." "It was a terrible plan," Anthony said, grabbing her shoulders. "You could have died." "I knew you would come back," Sarah said. "You are too stubborn to leave a puzzle unfinished." "Touching," Malcor gasped from the floor. "But irrelevant. The gate is opening." He was right. Despite his incapacitation, the seed was still active. The beam of white energy in the center of the room was widening. Through the viewports, the reality of Wisp Harbor was beginning to tear. The sky was peeling away like wet paper, revealing the swirling, chaotic hyperspace tunnel beyond. "We have to stop the signal," Anthony said, rushing to the console. "Poppy, get the storyteller module." Poppy scrambled down the ladder, tossing the device to Anthony. "Papa, the adventure beat won't work," Poppy warned. "The spire is singing in a different key now." "We do not need a beat," Anthony said, plugging the module into the main console. We need a counter-argument. He looked at the waveforms dancing on the screen. The spire was speaking in complex mathematical fractals. It was a language of pure physics. Sarah, Anthony barked, I need you to sniff out the harmonic nodes. Tell me where the signal is weakest. Sarah closed her eyes, her ears swiveling toward the humming crystal. High frequency, near the top. It smells like burning ozone and lemon. That is the beta wave. Anthony adjusted the dial on the module. Poppy, I need you to modulate the tempo. Keep it erratic. Do not let the spire find a rhythm to lock onto. On it, Poppy spun the dial like a DJ at a rave. Freestyle mode. Anthony's hands flew across the keyboard. He wasn't shooting bullets. He was shooting math. He was injecting chaotic data streams into the spire's pristine logic. He was feeding the machine paradoxes. Malcor, Anthony shouted over the rising noise. You wanted to know the cost of family. Malcor looked up, blood trickling from his nose as the pressure mounted. Family is a weakness, a liability. Wrong, Anthony yelled, slamming the final sequence into the console. We humans are great at turning liabilities into assets. We take the broken parts and we build something stronger. He hit the execute key. The storyteller module pulsed. A discordant, jagged screech of audio feedback blasted through the chamber. It was the sound of 1,000 chalkboards being scratched at once. The spire shuddered. The white beam of energy turned a sickly green, then fractured. Crack. The crystal pedestal cracked. The veil seed popped out of the slot smoking. The wormhole above the spire didn't open. It collapsed inward with a sound like a thunderclap in a vacuum. The shockwave blew the viewports out, showering the room in safety glass. No, Malcor screamed. The investment. The gateway. Denied, Anthony said, stepping back from the console breathless. The gravity field around Malcor dissipated, but he didn't get up. The resonance backlash had fused the servos in his exoskeleton. He was trapped in his own armor, a statue of his own ambition. Warden Halston and Brannick limped into the room, their weapons raised. Secure him, Anthony said, pointing to Malcor, but don't kill him. He tried to kill your daughter, Sarah said, her voice hard. He deserves a drop off the balcony. No, Anthony said. He picked up the old analog video camera that Dr. Keene had carried up. Killing him makes him a martyr for the corporate ledger. We are going to do something worse. He pointed the camera at Malcor, who was struggling uselessly in his frozen suit. Dr. Keene, Anthony said. Is the transmitter rigged? Wired to the emergency broadcast frequency, Keene said, flipping a switch on the wall. Analog signal, unblockable, range 10 parsecs. Action, Anthony said. He filmed Malcor. He filmed the smoking veil seed. He filmed the shattered control room. This is Wisp Harbor, Anthony spoke into the camera's microphone. This is not a mining accident. This is the Asterian Combine attempting to weaponize Class A precursor technology in violation of the Interstellar Concordat. Director Malcor Rayne just tried to hold a colony hostage. He turned the camera to Halston, Brannick, Sarah, and Poppy. We are the costs he talked about, Anthony said, and we are closing the account. He cut the feed. That signal is hitting every independent trade ship in the sector right now, Halston said, grinning through his pain. By morning, Asterian stock will be radioactive. The other corporations will eat them alive. Malcor slumped in his suit, defeated not by a bullet, but by the one thing a corporation fears most, transparency. The battle was over. The spire was silent, but the room was still vibrating. The bloom outside was fading the black auroras, retreating into the ether. But the veil seed lying on the floor began to glow again. Not violet, soft white. And then a voice filled the room. It didn't come from the speakers. It came from the air itself, vibrating the dust motes. Anthony froze. He dropped the camera. The sound of it, hitting the floor, echoed in the sudden silence. He knew that voice. It was a voice he had replayed in his head every night for 10 years. A voice he thought he had buried in the wreckage of the habitat ring. Elena, he whispered. I held the door, the voice said. It sounded weary, like a radio transmission from very far away, but filled with an infinite warmth. I held it open so you could find your way. Sarah stepped back her hand, covering her mouth. She looked at the bloom, fading outside. The bloom, Sarah whispered. It isn't a storm, it is a consciousness. She didn't die. Anthony fell to his knees beside the veil seed. She became the resonance. The project failed, Anthony, Elena's voice washed over him. But I didn't want to leave you. I didn't want to leave our world. So I held on to the static. I became the shield around Wisp Harbor. I waited for you to stop running. Tears streamed down Anthony's face, washing away the grime of the battle. I am sorry. I am so sorry, Elle. I was a coward. No, the voice said. You were a father. You protected her. The light from the seed shifted, focusing on Poppy. She is beautiful, Anthony. She looks like you when you were thinking hard. Poppy stepped forward, her eyes wide. She reached out to the floating dust. Mama! Hello, my little spark. The voice was fading, now growing static-filled. The door is closing now. The energy is spent. I can finally rest. You are safe now. You are all safe. Don't go, Anthony pleaded, reaching out to the empty air. I am not going, Elena said. I am just quieting down. Anthony, look at who is standing beside you. Anthony turned. Sarah was standing there, tears silently tracking through the dust on her fur. She was there, Elena's voice whispered, almost gone. That night, in the fire. Anthony looked at Sarah. The memory of the explosion 10 years ago flashed in his mind, the chaos, the heat, the screaming. He had been pinned under a beam. He couldn't reach the crib. He remembered a shadow moving through the flames, a shadow with a tail. He remembered a voice shouting a code phrase to the rescue team. Date me tonight, Sarah whispered, the words trembling. Anthony stared at her. Anthony. That was you, Sarah nodded, her voice thick with emotion. It was the distress code for the mercenary extraction team I was working with. Delta Alpha Tango Echo. Date. It meant civilian package secure. I pulled Poppy from the crib. I handed her to the medic, and then I ran because I was illegal. You saved her, Anthony said, the realization shaking him to his core. You saved her 10 years ago. I didn't know it was you, Sarah said. Until Poppy sent that message. Date me tonight. It brought it all back. The fire. The baby. I thought destiny was playing a cruel joke. It wasn't a joke. Elena's voice was just a breath now. It was a thank you. Be happy, Anthony. Be happy, my love. The veil seed flickered once and then went dark. The hum stopped. The bloom vanished completely from the sky, leaving behind a clear, star-filled night, the first clear sky Wisp Harbor had seen in a decade. Silence stretched in the ruined control room. Anthony remained on his knees for a long time. Then he felt a small hand on his shoulder. Poppy. And then another hand, stronger, scarred with sharp claws, retracted in gentleness. Sarah. He looked up. She is gone, Anthony said. She is at peace, Sarah corrected softly. She helped him stand up. They walked out onto the balcony. The cool night air rushed to meet them. Below, the fires were dying down. The Combine soldiers were surrendering, their weapons lowered as the news of the broadcast spread. The miners and refugees were cheering, a sound that rose up the side of the spire like a wave. Anthony looked at his hands. They weren't shaking anymore. He looked at Sarah, the Fox alien neighbor, the cleaner, the woman who had saved his daughter twice, once from fire and once from his own despair. We have a lot to talk about, Anthony said. We have time, Sarah said. She leaned against the railing, her tail wrapping comfortably around Anthony's leg. This time, he didn't pull away. "So," Poppy said, squeezing between them, "does this mean I get a larger allowance since I technically saved the galaxy with a toy?" Anthony laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused for years, but it felt good. "We will discuss your negotiation tactics later." He looked out at the settlement of Wisp Harbor. It was battered. It was ugly. It was a pile of scrap in a desert. But the bloom was gone. The sky was clear. "Let's go home," Anthony said. Sarah looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. She tilted her head, a playful smile returning to her lips. "Your home or my tent?" she asked. Anthony put one arm around Poppy and the other around Sarah. He pulled them close, forming a strange, mismatched, perfect silhouette against the stars. "As long as it is ours," Anthony said. "I do not care." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "Good answer, old nerd," she whispered. "Good answer." They began the long descent down the spire, not as refugees, not as soldiers, but as a family walking into a quiet morning.